about how little we know. Because before he got into what he got into with the whole bigger environmental picture, he was a researcher. And he was a researcher who knew about the reproductive cycle of fruit flies. That was what he specialized in. That's how specialized he was. Of one type of fruit fly, actually, not even all fruit flies. So he knew really a lot about how that particular type of fruit fly reproduced, but he didn't know a lot about a lot of other things. And that is the way we tend to work, because of the fact that we don't deal that well with really complex information. So we have to start scoping stuff out so that we can handle the complexity of things, because nature is complex. There's a lot to it. And he told a really chilling story about a type of a soil additive that was being tested, and that evidently when they do these kinds of tests on soil things, they like to test them in sterile soil, because of course soil is very complex and has so much stuff in it that might mess up the measurements. And a particular student was tasked with doing some testing on this, and he hadn't been indoctrinated into the ways of creating all these, making all these things externalities and not worrying about them. So he said, well, I'll use real soil, and discovered that this particular soil additive basically obliterated all the living things in the soil which are required for plants to take up nutrients, because plants don't take nutrients directly from the soil. There's all sorts of things in the soil that actually help the plants do that. And so, because this student didn't do it in the time-honored tradition of scoping things out that are too complex to think about, it may have saved us from having some soil additive on the market that was destroying our soil. Type 1 error. These are things we want to avoid, because what happens is you start having to pump energy into the system to keep it going, and that's not sustainable. It needs to be able to sustain itself. Great example. Put your house at the top of the hill. Right? Great view. What do you do now to get water to it? That kind of thing. If your water is downhill at all from you, then you're having to pump stuff up here, right? And then what happens when you're at the very top of the hill and that north wind comes blowing down in the middle of winter, like it likes to do? There's no way, there's nothing for you to shelter with, so you have to do something else, and you have to keep putting energy in, and you can't recover from it. You're just constantly putting more energy in to offset the mistakes. Patterns. Patterns are a key part of what we do in permaculture design. Ghosts in the machine. So knowledge of patterns will help you with design. So some examples of patterns. The Fibonacci sequence. I won't go into it in the great detail that I did last week, but we'll look at a picture here. It's an interesting one. When Jesse got here for the course last summer, it was the first time he'd been here on the prairies in the summertime, and he looked around and he said, this isn't a dry landscape. You've got plenty of water here. And we all kind of scratched our head, because we're told perpetually how dry it is on the prairies, and there's always drought and all that kind of stuff. So, and he said, well, you can tell by the landscape, because wet landscapes have curves. Wet landscapes, they slope. Dry landscapes, on the other hand, have lines, right? So you get cliffs, you get right there. Draw the very good at that one. The Bugs Bunny thing, right? So Wile E. Coyote standing here, so the big rock can fall on his head. Dry landscapes there are cliffs and jagged edges and that kind of thing, and that kind of stuff. And so Jesse got here and he said, yeah, there's no issues with water around here. In the last few years, of course, with the state of my basement, I'm inclined to agree with them. Tessellations, mosaic patterns, do things like indicate dry soil. So this is Fibonacci. Everyone can see the cool spirals in that, right? The way, depending on how you look at it, they spiral outward or spiral inward, right? So I looked up why this happens. The reason why is because if you're trying to fill something that's a circle like this, if you try to fill it with straight lines radiating out, you're going to have lots of gaps because, of course, the distance widens as you come out. So if you go in a spiral formation, it's much easier and more efficient to fill a circular space. So that's kind of cool. Nature knows how to do that all by itself. A mosaic pattern. Right? These are called tessellations. This is just a brickwork patio. But you can see in that, I think, compacted soil when it dries out does the same kind of thing. You've probably all seen that before. When the soil dries out, you get cracks and things that look like that. Edges. So it's a boundary between two parts of the system. So this is where lots of the activity happens. Edges are often very productive. So for example, the edge of a pond, right? There's a boundary between the water, the ground. In that boundary area that where the transition is, so the pond is shallower, so the water's there, but the earth is right underneath it. That's where you tend to be, things are most productive because plants will grow there because they can root somewhere, but they can grow up to actually get sunlight, whereas where it's out too deep, they can't do that. So as soon as the plants are there, of course, all the things that like to feed off the plants show up. So all kinds of bugs, then you get your smaller fish, then you get your bigger fish coming because that's where the smaller fish are. So all of the interesting stuff tends to happen at edges. Okay, so we talked about using patterns. So if you want to efficiently fill a circular space, go in a spiral formation, right? And a good example of this is like a herb spiral. We talked about this last week. If you weren't here last week and you don't know what a herb spiral is, put up your hand. You know herb spiral? Okay. We can go through this. We're doing fairly well for time because I'm talking to Blue Street here. So a herb spiral is you've got a round area to fill. So what you do is you take a side view of that, you basically mound it up, so a hill, and then you take around the hill and you can do some landscaping with some kind of rock. Use concrete, which is affectionately known as urbanite, is very handy for this kind of thing. And so build a wall that goes around like this in a spiral pattern, and then you start planting. And so you plant herbs, and what you do is the ones that like dry soil, and that you will put at the top. And then you'll work your way down the spiral, moving to ones that gradually like more moisture, so you can get down to the end and have ones that like things to be really damp. Because what happens is when you get a lot of rain, the water is going to do two things. It's going to soak downward because water will go downward through the soil. So this will dry out fastest. But also in a heavy rain, the water will go follow this pattern. So down around here is where you will have most of your moisture. So it does a couple of things for you. It allows you to fill that space fairly efficiently. It deals with the water. If you want to increase the amount of edge area, so use a pattern of lobes. Keyhole pattern, say for a garden, creating a keyhole garden where you walk into an area and you've got all this edge space so you can reach everything around. You've got a fair bit of area where your garden can grow, but you can still reach it and tend it all without having to walk on it and compact the soil. So an example here in a pond, we want to increase the edge area, right? There's a nice circular pond. Change the shape of it and see how much bigger the amount of edge space got by doing that. Okay. Now on to the new stuff. So all of you who have been here for the last couple can wake up again. Fresh water. It's actually taken directly from Jesse's slide, so I don't know where he got the numbers from and how current they are. This is where the fresh water in the world is, basically, right? Mostly in ice sheets and glaciers. Turbine and groundwater and deep groundwater. We want to make water work as many ways as possible when it's on our land. You don't want the water to just go whooshing by. The more things you can do with it while it makes its way through your land, the better. So we want to store as much as we can. Store it in the soil, in things like swales and ponds. We'll talk about swales and we'll show some pictures in a minute. Aquaculture, right? Getting things growing in the water. More difficult to do in our climate because, of course, things freeze really solidly in the middle of winter. Water, of course, is used for carrying nutrients. It's an energy resource, right? As we talked about, keeping water in an area uphill. You're actually storing energy with the water. So, some of the things that we want to do is, say, create swales and ponds. So even in our yards, these are things that we can do. Small ponds, we can't create big dams or that kind of thing, but small ponds. Swales, do you have pictures, stuff about swales, or just a little? No. Oh, yeah, okay. I've got some pictures from some of Jesse's stuff that I'll show of swales. A swale is basically a ditch that you dig that runs on contour. So on contour meaning that it's at the same elevation all the way along. And the reason for that, of course, is because you need it to be at the same elevation so when the water gets into it, the water will stay in it instead of just going to one end. So what happens with a swale is from a side view, you're going down and you've got a slope. The water's just going to run right down there, right? If you dig a swale on contour, what you'll be doing is you'll be digging a ditch, taking the earth from the ditch, mounding it up so that you've got something to hold. And what happens is the water comes down and now it will fill that. And so if that runs, if you've got a hill that goes like this along and you do a big long one, you can have a swale that runs, if you had the space and large open line, you could have a swale that ran for hundreds of meters and held water. What happens is it fills up with water, and then that water gradually soaks its way downhill into the soil instead of running over the soil. And we can do that kind of thing in our yards as well. We can dig things like this. I'm planning with my yard to dig one, and so it doesn't just look like a big ditch. I'm going to fill it in with red brick. So fill it with red brick, because even though it looks like it's full with red brick, there's still a lot of space in all the gaps around the brick. So water will come in, fill the thing up, soak down, but my neighbors don't think, why is that guy digging a drainage ditch in his front yard? Right? It looks like a pathway, but it's serving a purpose. So. We can't really, once again, we can't really put big, large storage dams or big ponds. Although I was watching some cool videos on YouTube about natural swimming pools. I guess they appear to be really big in Germany. I don't know. All of the videos I saw were all like German companies building these things and people having these. So. But one thing we can do, of course, is catch the water coming off our roof and store it in tanks. Or what we can do, actually, is we can do something like this. We can take you've got your roof, right, your eaves trough. We can put a tank up or a couple of tanks, because one good rain event and that tank, my tank's full. We put a couple of tanks up, connect it, then take the overflow from there, divert it down into some kind of a swale that we've got in our yard, so that you're saving the water up here where you can use it for irrigation, because even just having it a little bit above ground, it's fairly easy to irrigate just with gravity. And then you're also going down to catch as much as you can down in groundwater in your yard to keep the moisture from going away. And of course, mulching to reduce evaporation, reduce the surface area, right? You can close these off and have an opening where it comes in. You'll be able to keep leaves out, reduce mosquitoes, because if it's just sitting there, you know what it's like here in the summertime, mosquitoes. Irrigating at dusk, another big one, right? Don't irrigate during the heat of the day, or whole bunches of it will just evaporate off. A little bit about soil. These were more numbers from Jesse as well about soil, the condition that our soil is in. This is pretty astounding. This is 95, right? 650 tons per hectare of topsoil gone just because of wind in Kansas. That's a fair bit. So we want to do our part in our yards. And I'm talking primarily urban, because I'm assuming most of you you don't all have massive acreages or farms and stuff where you're taking this back to. Most of you are in the city like me. So soils are conserved, right? Forests, prairies, meadows, but also in our yards, right? So if we mulch, we start going with a mulching system, and not tilling and not exposing the dirt, turning things over so the wind can blow it away. We are helping to build soils in our yard. Soil pH. pH is acidity, the acid level of the soil. We can do things to adjust, right? Add compost for alkaline soils, and something that's a base, right, like limestone or that kind of stuff, if your soils are too acidic. It affects the soil, the pH, it affects the plants, because different plants like different soil conditions in terms of acid. Blueberries like a little more acidic soil. I'm excited. I'm actually taking a class in soils this year. I'm getting my horticulture certificate through extension. So it's just starting now. So do this in another month. I'll be able to tell you a lot more about it. So we can't do much in terms of this, right? Mineral content. You can do a little, but not tons. But in the overall quality of our soil in terms of air, because soil's not, there's so much to soil, right? It's not just, we just say dirt, but it's not really just dirt. There's all kinds of living things, but there's also air, right? Good soil has air in it, and there's water in it, and all of that kind of stuff. And we can do quite a lot with that within our yards. This was an interesting one. I think we watched a video about this where it was one of Jeff Lawton is the #1 guy now in terms of permaculture. I think Bill Mollison was the guy who started the whole thing down in Australia, but he is 80-some years old now, so he's not so active in it anymore. And Jeff Lawton is the fellow who's taken over the research institute there. And we watched a fair number of videos, and there are a fair number on YouTube if you want to go looking at some stuff. Go to YouTube. One really cool one that'll just make you go wow is called Greening the Desert. And there are excerpts, various excerpts on YouTube for it, but it is pretty cool because he went to the desert in Jordan, just horrible, stark, dry sand, and they started growing stuff in a very short amount of time just by applying these principles. They had fig trees that were producing actual fruit. Everyone thought he was crazy when he started doing this and nothing would grow. They did it. Weeds are indicators often of your soil quality, deficiencies in things, of nutrients. Also things like taproots like to grow when the soil's compacted, and taproot's a big, stronger root and can push its way through that kind of stuff. So if you've got lots of taproot plants, often you've got compacted soil. But they're also an indicator of a deficiency in the soil. And this past summer, as I've been morphing my yard through various, my wife might say abominations, but as I'm trying to move things along, I planted some potatoes in the front this past year. And they were going great guns, I thought. I've always heard potatoes are good for breaking up soil. Realized after the fact potatoes aren't good for breaking up soil. It's the work you have to do to get them out that breaks the soil up. Right? Because you have to dig them out, and that's what breaks the soil up. Potatoes themselves just sit there and don't do anything. So they were going along, everything was going great, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, I got all this stuff that's called hawksbeard, and it's a weed, looks sort of like a dandelion, but it'll shoot up about this tall, and it's got little compound heads like a dandelion on it. So I went and started doing some searching and discovered that, first off, the soil was really compacted. I didn't know that ahead of time because hawksbeard is a taproot. But also that it indicated that there was a calcium deficiency in the soil, because that's what hawksbeard tends to grow. So what I did is I just went out after it and hacked it all down, and when I just threw it in a pile, and when fall came and I dug up my potatoes, I just hacked the hawksbeard and threw it on that area. And so in the springtime I'll start doing a bit of work, but I'm mulching it back into the soil, because what happens is taproot, or hawksbeard, because of the root, it can actually go down and bring up calcium from deeper down in the soil than other plants can. So it will actually have a fair bit of calcium in it. So if you want to bring calcium from back into the soil, you can take the weeds that are there and use them as mulch or green manure, and it will actually bring your soil back into a balanced state. That was pretty cool. That was something I learned last year too. Okay, so pictures came from these. I will do my best this week to get all three of these workshops up on the Permasask site, permasask.ca. These are some other resources you can look for. A fair number of you, I think, are here via Rooted, but if you're through other things, permasask.ca, that's the Research Institute. We're just getting that one going. And this summer we are doing the Permaculture Design Certificate again. If you are interested, the information is on the Permasask site. We've also got a Facebook page for the Permaculture Research Institute now. Some other reading, if you're interested. A Short History of Progress is really interesting book. It was from a Massey lecture. So, something else we're doing, permablitzes. This is part of the reason we started doing these workshops, that we wanted to do this with Rooted and with the Research Institute as well, and do these permablitzes, which are like work bees, where we're going to go to people's yards over the summer, and if all goes well, go in over a weekend and redo somebody's yard with the design. We'll have to have the design done ahead of time, but we'll go in, and with enough people we can go in and do this. Hopefully we can get a few of these done.